Okay, today we're going to talk about 7.3 complex numbers and I. Alright, so complex numbers are a specific type of number and it has a definition to it, and so does I, which is imaginary. Okay, so what is I? We've learned that a negative under square root creates an imaginary number. We learned that when we talked about the discriminant. So we now can identify the imaginary number by using I. So it would be something like this. We'd say 3i, negative 6i, something like that. Okay? We can simplify negative under square root using I to represent the negative. So the definition, which you need to write down, of I is this. I is equal to the square root of negative 1, and I squared is equal to negative 1. So what that means is, remember on the worksheet the other day we had a square root of negative 4. Well, I can split that to be equal to the square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1. And what that allows me to do is, well, 4 is a perfect square, so that's going to be a 2. And this definition right here tells me that I is equal to the square root of negative 1. So now instead of having this, I can just have I. And so what it allows you to do is actually come up with a representation of that imaginary root, because remember it's imaginary, it floats above or below the x-axis. It doesn't actually ever cross it. Okay, so we can do several things with I. We can talk about i's raised to powers. We can simplify radicals I, and we can multiply I. Alright, so patterns of I. So if I have I cubed, that's the same thing as I squared times I. Well, we know I squared is negative 1. It tells us that right here. So really our answer would be negative I. I to the 4th is I squared times I squared, both of which are negative 1. So negative 1 times negative 1 is 1. So there's patterns to I that you can keep going. If you're interested in it, you can look it up online. But it kind of gives you what happens with I and how it flip-flops between negatives and positives and things like that. Okay, but what we really use it for is simplifying radicals, like when we get a square root that's negative and using the quadratic formula. So what you do is, if it's a perfect square, you take the square root of the number. So 25 square rooted is 5. Okay, now we know this negative sign is going to create an I, so we can just write I. Same for 64. 64 is a perfect square, the square root of which is 8. Because it has a negative, I'm just going to write an I. The I basically stands for the negative sign. Okay, you can also multiply numbers that contain I, and you do it just as if I was a variable. So you would do 3 times 5 to get 15. You would do I times I, which would be I squared. But remember that I squared we defined as negative 1, so my answer would really be negative 15. Same for this one. We can multiply negative 6 times 4 to get negative 24. I times I, which is I squared. I squared is defined as negative 1, so negative 24 times negative 1 is just 24. Okay, so we use I when we're talking about complex numbers, and we can use it and manipulate it as if it's a variable, but it's not a variable. It represents an imaginary number. Okay, so complex numbers are defined as numbers written as a plus bi, where a and b are numbers. So they're just like coefficients. So we have 5 plus 4i as an example of that, negative 2 minus 3i as an example. Okay, and we can do things with complex numbers using the properties of I. So I can add them, which is what this would be what it would look like, which really you're just combining like terms. You can subtract them, which first you would distribute the negative, just like we do if it was x terms, and then combine like terms. And then we can also multiply them using our FOIL method. Okay, so on the next slides we're going to do examples of these 3 concepts. So make sure you write the examples down. Okay, so complex numbers a plus bi. And it's always written in that order, because we like to go alphabetical. Alright, so let's do an example. So if I'm adding complex numbers, I'm combining like terms. Combine like terms. Okay, so 6 and negative 4 are like terms. So I'm going to do 6 plus a negative 4, and I'm going to get a 2. Then 2i plus a negative 7i would be negative 5i, and we would be done. That would be your solution. Pretty simple, right? Not too complex, even if it is a complex number. Alright, so that's adding. Subtracting, basically the same thing. You are distributing this negative sign to both things, so really I have minus 3 and plus 7i. and I have 2 plus 4i in front. Then I combine like terms, just like I would if these were x's. So 2 minus 3 is negative 1. 4 plus 7 is positive 11i. Okay? The exponents on these i's don't change because we're not multiplying, and only exponents change when you multiply. So this would be our solution. So adding and subtracting, or just like combining like terms, we kind of pretend that the I is an x, just to relate it to something you already understand. Now the difference is when we multiply. We have to use the FOIL method. Okay, I know it's not going away, it's forever in your life. So remember, FOIL stands for first times first, so 2 times 7 is 14. Outside, so 2 times negative 3i would be minus 6i. Inside would be plus 35i. And then our last terms, because we're multiplying, remember it's going to be 5 times negative 3, which is minus 15. But we're also doing I times I to get I squared. Now, this is where we have to take one extra step in our FOIL process. Because I squared is by definition equal to negative 1, I'm going to cross it out and change it to negative 1. So negative 15 times negative 1 is a positive 15. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite what I already have. Nothing over here has changed. And then I combine like terms. So 14 plus 15 is 29. Negative 6 plus 35 is also 29, but it has an I. You always want to write it in order A plus B I. Okay, so your solution to the multiplying problem would be that. Okay, so make sure you took really good notes. If you're still a little confused, that's okay. We're going to practice this in class tomorrow. The really big thing is that you know what the two definitions of I are, that I is equal to the square root of negative 1, and I squared is equal to negative 1. Okay, those are the most important things. So make sure you take good notes. Make sure you fill in your summaries so that you get credit for actually watching this video, and I will see you in class tomorrow.